FS. Okay, this is the adjustments when health insurance is provided section. And this next section deals with adjustments to income that come into play when health insurance is being provided for the children. As I mentioned earlier, question 21 represents a fork in the road from the standpoint that line 21 follows line 20 and leads into lines 22 and 23. Then the progression jumps to line 27. In a similar manner, question 24, dealing with adjustments when there is no health insurance covering the children, also follows from line 20 and proceeds to line 26 and also picks up at line 27. So the path of the calculation splits after line 20 and joins up again at line 27. To help illustrate the two different paths this calculation takes, we'll jump back to line 20A, covering out-of-pocket costs. Going back to the line 20A parenthetical, we'll assume that Dad pays or has withheld from his monthly wages the amount of $750 as his contribution for a family health insurance plan. Let's also assume that Dad's costs of individual coverage would be $500. I'm trying to keep the numbers close to what you would encounter in real life situations, but rounded to amounts that are easy to work with in your head without resorting to a calculator. So the difference is $250 per month, which comes out to $3,000 annually. Let's continue with our example by assuming that there are 3 children covered by the policy, and therefore we would divide the $3,000 annual differential by the 3 covered children. The result is $1,000 per year per child. Now, if there were 2 children who were the subject of the child support calculation, the amount that goes on line 20B is $2,000, or 2 times $1,000. The action of the line 28 parenthetical is probably easier to understand by taking a look at the screen you see here. We're using the health insurance example that we talked about earlier in connection with line 7B, dealing with the annual contributing cost differential. We're showing you the cost of the individual health insurance policy, $438, and the cost of the policy covering the 3 children, $576. The monthly difference is $138, which amounts to a $1,656 annual cost difference. Because there are 3 children in our example, we divide the annual cost by 3, and that gives us a per-child breakdown of $552. Because only 1 child is the subject of this worksheet calculation, we multiply 552 times 1, that's $552. If there were 2 children, the amount would be $1,104. Paging back to page 1, I see that there's only 1 child who is the subject of this calculation, so I'll change the amount on line 20B to $1,000. Scrolling back to line 21, you see that the point of line 21 is to take the amounts, if any, on lines 19, the child care expenses, and line 20A, out-of-pocket health care expenses, and apply the line 16 percentage against the sum of those amounts. The thing to note is that you're always taking the percentage from one column and applying it against the amounts in the other column. This is the line we get comments about several times a year. Not frequently, but regularly. Usually the comment is directed at line 21C, which in technical support we call the "it doesn't look right to me" line. It may typically involve a husband who has significant out-of-pocket expenses on lines 19 and or 20A, and he questions the fact that he's not getting what seems to be an appropriate credit on line 21C for his expenditures. In answer to those comments, here's how it's supposed to work. If we consider the amounts on lines 19 and 20A to be additional costs of raising the children, which is exactly what they are, then each parent is only responsible for those expenses in the proportion that their income bears to the party's combined income. In terms of line 16A, that would mean if Mom has lines 19 or 20A expenses, Dad should only be responsible commensurate with his percentage. Therefore, we take the amount in Mom's column and multiply it by line 16 percentage in Dad's column. For negative adjustments, for example, line 21C, We take the amount on line 20A in Dad's column. Since he's responsible for his percentage share of it, we subtract only that amount that is derived by multiplying that amount by Mom's percentage. Well, you can see that if Mom's annual income is really low or zero, Dad ends up being responsible for the whole expenditure and gets little or no deduction on line 21C because Mom's percentage is nearly zero. Of course, dads or obligors in general hate when that happens, but line 21 is strictly a math line, so there isn't much you can argue about. Another thing to note about line 21 is that you're only supposed to complete the column for the obligor in a sole residential arrangement. Only if it's a shared parenting arrangement are entries placed in both the dad's and the mom's columns. Now scrolling down to line 22, you can see that, like line 21, it's essentially a straight math line. What it does is take the party's annual obligation and adjust it according to the amount or amounts on line 21. That brings us to line 23, and you've got to like line 23's caption, actual annual obligation. Recall that line 18 gave you the annual support obligation, then line 22 gave you the adjusted annual support obligation. Now line 23 is providing the actual annual obligation. In a way, these names remind me of the Seinfeld TV episode where Jerry made a Japanese comedy pilot whose name translated as The Super Terrific Jerry Show. So what will the legislators call the obligation by the time we get to line 28? We'll see what happens when we get there. We're not there yet. Line 23's purpose is to provide a reduction in child support obligation equal to any amounts the child might receive in the form of non-means-tested benefits received as a result of the death, disability, or retirement of the obligor parent. It makes sense that a party's obligation should be reduced by any amounts or third-party payments made to the child on behalf of that parent. The thing to note about this line is that the benefit must be non-means-tested, meaning aid for dependent children and similar types of benefits which are means-dependent are not considered on this line. Also, the way this line is worded, it appears that the benefit must be received through the obligor parent and not the obligee parent. I say that because line 22A refers to the obligor parent only, and line 22B reads received on behalf of the parent. The word the seems to be referring to the obligor parent. I think one can interpret this line in other ways, but I'm not aware of any cases that have tested this issue. The adjustment is figured on line 23C at the top